Coming up on today's episode, you find some new evidence for or against your current beliefs. How do you take it? The sun will rise tomorrow, but will we? All that and much more up next on Themindhere. Hey, what is up everyone? It's Theguyhere and welcome back to another episode of Themindhere, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. Alright, so evidence. It's the topic that has somehow become controversial over the past few years. Let's take a look at evidence, shall we? So, evidence, what is it? Well, I'm pretty sure most people understand what it is, but just as a brief reminder, evidence is some information that suggests something about the environment you live in. Now, if all of us have an imperfect model of the environment and the world we live in, and we build this model based off of, you guessed it, evidence, something that suggests how the world may work. So evidence is pretty crucial to how we live our lives, as it tells us what our lives really mean and what we live in, right? So that's pretty important. But how should we take evidence? Do we take it at face value and say that that evidence must be true, so I need to update my model every time new evidence comes in? Or do we need to be more selective about it? How should we incorporate evidence? Well, I recently was reading an article and it discussed about a paper that looked into something related to evidence, but it's about the replication crisis in research, where research papers need to, in order to make sure that they are truthy, they have some evidence and they are worth reading, that they are likely to be true and good research papers. You need to be able to replicate the experiments you create. That's part of the scientific process. But what this study found is that the research papers that are cited more are often less able to be replicated, which is an issue. If you think about it logically, that means whatever evidence has been brought up here, the ones that are less likely to be true are the ones that are cited more, or the ones that are looked at more often. That's a pretty concerning red flag right there. If you want to update your model to be as close to reality as possible, you wouldn't want to go out of your way to look at imperfect evidence or just flat out fabricated evidence for that matter. So why is this happening? Well, this comes down to what I think is another imperfect a tool that we use, and that is metrics, something that we observe in our environment and we are able to measure. In this case, these metrics would be something like number of citations to maybe determine your raise in research papers or something like that. And a more familiar example might be just the old-fashioned clickbait, where your metric is looking at number of clicks because maybe ad revenue is by clicks, or maybe that's a metric you're looking at, but ultimately that just drives people to make things that click on make headlines and thumbnails that make people click on something, but not have actual substantial content in them, right? So imperfect metrics can make optimizing agents, humans in this case, optimize for the wrong thing and get results that we don't desire. So this paper talks a bit about it, and I'll provide a link to the article about it, and you can find the papers, the study from there about it. But it talks about essentially how both from the publishing side and the academics side, there's been more pressure to essentially just publish more exciting studies and finds. The more exciting it is, the more likely you will get cited, and the more money, more attention, more reputation you get, even though they may or may not actually be accurate, which is quite concerning. So how do we take this then? Do we just reject all evidence, the popular headlines? Well, no, not necessarily, because if you close off all evidence and just stay with whatever model you've had, then you're definitely not going to be improving your model. What you may want to consider instead is to take evidence in from a more more probabilistic standpoint rather than a more deterministic standpoint. For example, let's say you have some theory about why blue squares and red triangles don't go together in like graphic design or something like that, right? And you find a study that says they do go together. Okay, well, instead of updating a model, say, okay, now they do go together, and then reflect and change your models of how design should work. Maybe instead take it as a probability. Okay, so this paper has yet to be peer reviewed, so huge grain of salt there, but it suggests that this may go well together. Okay, keep that in mind. There's a likelihood that it could go well together. Let's say the research paper then is peer reviewed and gets high praise and is now being spread a little better. Okay, so now that people are more accepting of it and it has been peer reviewed, etc., maybe it's even stronger point of evidence. So increase that probability that this may be the best way to go about certain things. Or if people try to replicate some experiments in the study and aren't able to, maybe then you say, okay, well, I'll just drop the probability that that has an influence on it, or just ignore that evidence because it doesn't have the reliability that I need, right? So rather than saying, okay, yes or no, that very binary decision that we most often are familiar with, rather than that, maybe think in terms of probability, right? Let's say your friend tells you something that is against your beliefs. If you're really interested in it, maybe search it up and find where the source came from, because your friend, if they tell you something, that's probably not going to be very trustworthy unless they are an expert in the field. So then you want to get to more reliable sources, evidence that are more influential in the ability to update your models more accurately, right? So those are some suggestions for how you would deal with evidence, because unless you are an academic, it's pretty hard to change that tide of more clickbait, essentially. But what you can do as an individual, what we can do, is to take in evidence probabilistically. Take in everything as sort of a smear of probability that this is how the world works, but then keeping in mind that there may be some error or some inaccuracies with the evidence that we take in. That is, from my point of view, the healthiest way to take in evidence. So that's about evidence. But what about a little bit more ominous sentence that I talked about here about no guarantee that the sun may rise, but we may not. It sounds almost like the beginning of a horror story or something. Well, this was inspired by a video that I watched about from Robert Miles. He's a pretty well-known, well, not well-known, but I'd say well-respected computer scientist. And this video was talking about AI safety and what he thought was people taking AI safety for granted. And I wanted to generalize on it, and I'll put the video in the description, of course, just like the article. But the video, I'll shortly summarize, is talking about how a lot of people are taking for granted that we will be able to solve certain problems. Like we'll be able to control AI, we'll be able to get out of and control our climate, we'll be able to redirect an asteroid if we so need to, for example. Existential threats and people just sort of brushing it off and say, oh, there's enough bright people out there, we'll be able to take care of it. The issue with that is that there is no real guarantee that we will make it through whatever challenge we are given. Humanity has lasted so long, but just because we have lasted so long doesn't mean that we will continue to go on. We may face challenges that are just beyond our current capabilities, or we are not fast enough to adapt and overcome these challenges. There's nothing that says we should continue. And he makes a remark that certain mindsets might have you believe that humans are somehow inherently special in the universe and we must continue on and we can't just accidentally die out. And you can see how flawed that would be if you would think that. So it's just a warning, basically, that we can't take for granted that we have a future to go to, that we will be able to overcome the challenges we get to. And that, from an AI safety standpoint, it's talking about how a convergence of AI to something that is super powerful, that might have some existential threats. We can't take that for granted that we'll be able to solve that. right? But if we generalize this to essentially anything here, and he already sort of did in his video about asteroid impacts, this means that we can't take for granted that we will be able to solve problems. And for that matter, we can't take for granted that there will be a future to look forward to. And that brings me to something that I've sort of been struggling with, and it's been a bit of procrastination on certain aspects, mostly personal projects. But I really hope that doesn't get into my academic studies. But procrastination is a pretty serious issue. And some people claim that they work better under stress. But if you think about it, if there's no guarantee that there's a tomorrow to sort of borrow from when you procrastinate, then it's not really a viable strategy, right? If you want to delay some hard work to get some benefits, like maybe self-improvement, you're delaying that until the last 2 months of the year, for example, or something like that, because you set out a target in the beginning, but you've just sort of been delaying on it. Or you've been delaying your workouts, but now the race you signed up for is 2 weeks away. So you start training really hard, but that's not going to catch you up as if you were training for 5 months that you did since you signed up, right? But if there's no guarantee that you'll be able to overcome whatever challenge you've set out, or even that there is a tomorrow to look forward to, then procrastination doesn't really make sense, because there's no future to borrow from. And even a broader sense, our modern economy is essentially run off of borrowing from the future, right? Credit cards. This is credit card companies and banks assuming that there is a future where you will be able to pay back whatever you borrowed from them. Investing is where you give off money to some group or some entity and say, okay, I'm giving you it now, but in the future, I am banking that you will be able to give me more back. And this would be a better use of capital, money, than just sitting around, right? A bit of borrowing from the future, doing things now, right? Going into debt now and hoping that you'll be able to pay it back later based off of the current usage of whatever you borrowed with. And that can be dangerous because there's no guarantee that we will be able to do so. And once things fail, it may fail pretty catastrophically. There's a lot of, from economic standpoints, bubbles that happen. Those fail pretty catastrophically. If we take just other things, for example, in self-improvement, if you go into a spiral of bad habits, then you can't really take for granted that you once had good habits and did things, because there's no guarantee you'll be able to continue that. So there's a whole bunch of things that come to mind here, but the main standpoint is that we can't really take these for granted, and it's something that I myself am still struggling with, but it helps me, it grounds me to think that there's no guarantee that I may wake up tomorrow. There's no guarantee that the university I study at will still be here 10 years from now, or the country I live in now will be here 50 years from now. There's no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee of survival. Survival is something that needs active input in order to happen. So that's something to sort of get you thinking. Maybe a bit on the gloomy side, but also something that keeps us grounded from maybe unrealistic expectations that may creep up from certain entertainment or other media. So with the breakthroughs that I've had out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what I've been able to accomplish since last episode. It's mostly been focusing on moving to my new place here in the college dorm of my university, and that has been quite of a move. Everything from packing and getting logistics ready to then setting up for things in here, getting used to the environment, and setting up a good schedule. I'm still trying to get the best schedule that'll optimize for, time spent and when I'm spending it, so it matches my energy levels. All of that being said, that's still going on, but for the most part, I've settled down quite a bit. And just on the productivity side or of my personal projects, I recently, just today, released the music video of my piano transcription of a song that I really liked. So go on my channel if you're interested and check that out. Should be a pretty nice one, I'd say. But that's been a bit of progress there on my side with the music. On the side of other things like the plugin that I've been working on, that has been sort of stopped right now, but after I've gotten the music out, I'll take a little bit of a break from music and work on the plugin. So I guess that goes into the bit of calling my shots to next episode. I really want to get an update out for my Grinch Simulator plugin. That has sort of been stopped while I've been working on other things and preparing for the move, but now that I'm here and it's basically settled, it's time to get to work on that. Of course, finishing that settling and just getting things in order, that'll be a priority, but that's sort of a back-end thing that you guys won't really see. On the music side, I'll be looking into more songs I may be able to transcribe and possibly looking into maybe getting back into actually composing, maybe Vocaloid or just other songs wise. But that's something that'll be a little further off into the future, nothing that you probably see especially on YouTube with finished products. I might be posting a bit more of behind the scenes on Instagram if you're interested in that. Go check out on my channel, there should be a social bar up at the top. Go check out my Instagram there. There'll be updates there as well. But the focus is to get everything settled and get updates out for Grinch Simulator. And work on making those plugins compatible to a lot of other versions, since that has been a real sticking point for these plugins. Minecraft server plugins. But that'll do for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate the support everyone has given me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you found this video, this episode, or this series to be inspiring, consider sharing this with other people that you think may benefit or find this interesting. Anyways, take care, stay humble. This is Theguyhere, out.